when I saw Jesus and he gave me a panorama of history, Jesus said, I'm only going to reveal these to you as they're shortly to come to pass. So people say, and I've never done drugs, quite candidly, so I'm not flashing back, but I have flashed forwards. I'm sure you're seeing that too. You know that what you're seeing and hearing from the Lord is something he showed you in the past, in the dream, in that moment of ecstasy, that ecstatic moment. And we're talking about the supernatural impartation of God's view of the future, God showing you the future, and the context of you playing in it. And Doug, for such an appointed time as this message at this time with this importance could not have gone out without you. But understand, ladies and gentlemen, it says a threefold cord in the Proverbs is not easily broken. And Tom, before you go there, let me ask you this. Was it almost breathtaking to you to hear Bill Gates say, you were the one that God used to open my eyes on the gates of hell, but were you a little bit blown back by Gates saying you won't be able to buy, sell, trade, or travel with, and yet the pulpits have been silent. Most prophecy teachers, quite candidly, they're too tied up in charts that went out of date when when, let's just say this, so many of the events that happened didn't happen. But what I am saying is this, no pulpit could have had a bigger audience than Bill Gates, and isn't it interesting? Well, the silence in the pulpits, and what I call them the pulpiteers, with Satan pulling the strings, the bottom line is that it was probably, I think that was a seminal moment, just like I believe this is a seminal moment. Answer that question, if you wouldn't mind, then take it right where you need to take it.
Yeah, well, of course, it's every day right now is one mind-blowing event after another, and all of us, I think, the beast turns out to be that we're seeing everything's being put in motion right now in which civil liberties are being suppressed, where big government is telling you you're going to have to do this or you're going to have to do that. And whether or not it becomes mandatory, it's going to become a de facto mandate if you have to have a health certificate, as they're also talking about, before you can buy or sell. Right now what we are viewing is a supernaturalism that is pushing to bring through those dynamic gates, Steve, this last days entity known as Antichrist. And don't forget that it is his false prophet, who I would call the Pope. It is his false prophet who is the one in the book of Revelation that actually causes all both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, and without which no man might buy or sell. And if you've noticed that Pope Francis has been agreeing with Gates of late, it ought to be universal, it ought to be made at no cost to everybody, but it ought to be, there ought to be some requirements around it. So yeah, that's definitely where we're going. And let me do something here. I'll bet it's going to take you a minute to figure out where I'm going with this, because I want to say some things about this Pope who's going to advocate very shortly, by the way, before the end of the year, in ways that are going to sound very, very prophetic. But I also believe it's connected to the virtual conference and the idea of aliens. Let me see if I can put these two together. One quick thing I do want to say, Doug, I do pray that people listening to this program will do what Steve said a moment ago. Pray for you and support your ministry financially. Pray for you because there are forces right now that want to shut you down, deplatform you, keep you from being able to earn a viable income, shut your mouth, get you to stop talking and having people on your program talking about information that is pertinent to fighting against whatever we would put the title on this. The globalist has been angry ever since the 2016 election, and they're doing everything they can foment to try to overthrow via a coup a sitting president, and they're not going to stop. They're not going to give up, and God help us. So here's the deal. Both Catholics and Protestant evangelicals see the current Pope echoing a prophesied role in numerous things, including pushing socialism, the system that Antichrist is going to employ, and so on. But the fact is, several Catholic defenders of the faith, including the largest Catholic news agencies in the world, CAN and EWTN News, as well as Rome's leading theologians like Archbishop Carlo Vigano, have stated recently that Pope Francis is the man from the book of Revelation and Daniel, the false prophet. Trump to warn him that Francis is leading the way for the children of darkness, right? That we see on the streets calling for this Marxist socialist uprising. But for mystic Catholics, it's a lot more than that. Many of them really do believe in the prophecy of the popes, which predicted 900 years ago that 112 popes from the day St. Malachi had his divine vision in Rome and forward would arrive, with the last one ruling over the Vatican when the church and the world enter the Great Tribulation period, according to that prophecy. Francis is seen as number 112 on that list, and the namesake that he took, Francis of Assisi, actually predicted that this final pope would be a deceiver, which makes him taking that name all the more astonishing. Now follow me here. In our best-selling book, Petrus Romanus, we especially featured retired Biblical Institute, eminent Catholic theologian, and Jesuit priest Malachi Martin, who had all this privileged information pertaining to secretive church world issues, including the third secret of Fatima. You know, that film just came out, and I think it's either in theaters or coming out on video now. But most people believe that the real truth behind the secret of Fatima has never been released. And Malachi Martin hinted that it actually spelled out parts of a plan to formally install the dreaded false prophet during what he called a final conclave. Now, his book, Windswept House, depicted how a pope would be secretly forced from office. Is that Pope Benedict? And replaced by a Jesuit, he said, who would help establish the final New World Order under Antichrist. Is that Pope Francis? He is a Jesuit. A shocking interview. And I want people to Google this and go and read it for yourself, because it's mind-boggling that it ever even happened. But an interview called "Is Francis the Last Pope?" It was published by the two largest Catholic news agencies in the world, in which the personal secretary to Pope Benedict and the prefect of the papal household for Pope Francis, so in other words, Archbishop George Gonzween, who is their personal pastor, he's the guy that gives them communion, he was interviewed, and he was specifically asked about the prophecy of Malachi, better known as the prophecy of the popes. He was asked about that. He was asked about the retirement of Benedict, and he was also asked if Pope Francis himself believes he is the last pontiff from the prophecy of the popes. So go and look that up and read it. The interview begins by making a direct reference at me, you, Steve, and you, Doug, had raised on the Hagman report regarding the dual lightning strikes atop St. Peter's Basilica on the evening of February 11, 2013, on the same day of Benedict's public resignation announcement. As soon as that happened, you guys invited me to come back on, saying, "Oh my gosh, Tom, how in the world could you possibly have known this, and what do you make of this weird phenomenon of lightning striking?" So it's important to establish, we talked about that before anybody else did. They can go back in the archives of your programs and listen to us talking about it. But Archbishop George Gonzween and others followed our interview. It was obvious that they had listened to that interview. And what was important about it, regarding the dual lightning strikes atop St. Peter's Basilica on the evening of February 11, 2013, the same day of Benedict's resignation program, about the inauguration of Francis and how, and actually go back and listen to it, because I did, and here's exactly what I said. I said, quote, "For a few adepts of history and secret orders, This sign from heaven was deliciously staged, end quote. I had said that because the term inaugurate is from the Latin inauguratio, and it refers to this archaic ceremony by which the forerunners of the Vatican, the Roman augurs, the soothsayers, approved a king or a ruler, a pope, if you will. And they did it through lightning omens as being the proof, if you will, the voice of the Roman gods, sanctioning the approval of a pope or a king or whatever. As for Petrus Romanus, his inaugural by the same omen that the ancient augurs would have used in determining the will of the gods for a king in that part of Rome, thunder and lightning, as the most important auspice and sign that Jupiter, the father of Apollo, was watching and that he was pleased. And the fact that it was 2 lightning strikes follows the biblical axiom that God speaks once, yea, twice, when it comes to establishing his voice or his will or his commentary. So it turns out, though, that I was not alone in my ponderings. I wasn't, you weren't, Steve, you weren't, as the Catholic news agencies followed us by confirming in their article, Is Francis the Last Pope? Let me quote a little piece of this. Listen to this. It's astonishing. Quote, many observers chose to interpret these lightning strikes as a divine reaction to the historical announcement of Pope Benedict's resignation made that very morning. Then the Catholic article goes on to say this, as his personal Swain reminisced about how both he and Benedict only found out about the lightning strike after the event, and that the impression to them was one of a sign from above, a reaction, end quote. Gonzween then tells Bade, who actually conducted the interview, that when Gonzween showed Benedict images of the spectacular incident a few days later, the Pope asked him whether this was some kind of a digital montage, and Gonzween said that it was not, before adding, however, nature had spoken, he said, echoing what you and I had talked about on this program, and that I had actually even published online in 2013. But then this astonishing report gets even more intriguing, because it adds, quote, during the interview, Paul bade popes, according to which Pope Francis may be considered to be the last pope, to which Archbishop Gonzween admitted, quote, indeed, when looking at the prophecy and considering how there was always a sound reference to popes mentioned in its history, it gave me the shivers. And speaking from historical experience, one has to say, yes, this is a wake-up call, end quote. Now, I mean, imagine that. And I want people to go look this article up and read it for themselves. You'll have to read it several times and scratch your head and say, holy cow, really? Really? Given that both current popes and their closest advisors at the Vatican have considered whether Pope Francis is the last pope, Petrus Romanus, the guy that reigns over the Vatican during the Great Tribulation period, and that this is perceived to them as a wake-up call? I mean, is it any wonder that you have these conservative scholars within the Catholic Church that are taking an increasingly careful view of Pope Francis? It is the subsequent question of whether Pope Francis is a false prophet the reason that canon lawyers and theologians for the Vatican hosted a conference in Paris a while back to discuss how to depose a heretical pope? I mean, honestly, keep in mind, Catholic and Protestants have historically viewed the prophecy of the popes as only one of many omens predicting the role that Rome is going to play in the end times, and that ultimately the predicted destruction of the seven-hilled city of Rome, which, by the way, I believe could very well happen as Apophis rains down asteroid debris in 2029 in the middle of the Great Tribulation period. I'll explain. The Roman Catholic Church, therefore, as Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots, the abomination of the earth, Revelation 17:5. Look, I'm not anti-Catholic. I don't want people to get mad at me. But this is a Catholic point of view. In other words, historians of the Catholic Church throughout hundreds of years have believed what I am saying is absolutely the truth. That the woman that rides the scarlet-colored beast is very clearly described by John as a city that sits on 7 mountains that rules over the kings of the earth. Revelation 17:9, 17:8. And at the time that John wrote that, there was only one city on 7 hills that ruled over the kings of the earth, and that was Rome. Now, and he put it in the present tense. He said the woman is, period. So he's writing to the 7 churches throughout Asia, and he's letting them know the mystery of the harlot. Rome then was a military and political force that eventually disappeared from history as such, but the 7-hilled city continued as a spiritual and religious force that continues to this very day to host the kings of the earth, which bow down and kiss the Pope's ring. So if one accepts the veracity of Malachi's vision, which many Catholics do, then the Roman Catholic Church is necessarily the woman who rides the beast. But how else might this connect to 2029? Apophis' wormwood and the final pope. So the final lines of the prophecy of the Pope also predict that Rome's going to be destroyed. It says, quote, in extreme persecution, the seat of the Holy Roman Church will be accompanied by Peter the Roman, who will feed the sheep through many tribulations, and when they are over, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and a terrible and fearsome judge will judge his people, end quote. Now that seems to perfect Revelation 17:8, which describes the destruction and people standing afar off, aghast, looking at the smoke rising up of the burning city. The 700-year-old Jewish Zohar, one of the most important books in Jewish Kabbalistic magic, says that just before Messiah arrives, the kings of the earth will gather in Rome and suddenly be killed by, guess what, fiery objects falling down from the sky. Could that be why I saw the resignation of the Pope, all that whole picture, the coming of Petrus Romanus, and then I had a second revelation that I didn't even put together at first of Apophis falling down upon the earth? Could this be the breakup of Apophis wormwood in the middle of the Great Tribulation, simultaneous to when the Bible says that the great harlot is going? I mentioned the third secret of Fatima. Catholic sources likewise describe it as saying that Rome is going to be destroyed by fiery heavenly objects, the part of it that hasn't been released. Even, by the way, there's a lot of historical stuff here. The Sibylline Oracles, Book 2, prophesied of end times Rome, and what sounds suspiciously like asteroid debris. Here's a quote. And then shall after these appear of men. And by the way, this also ties in, Steve, to the return of the giants, transhumanisms, and so on. As you know, the Sibylline Oracle prophesied quite a bit about the return of the giants. Back to my quote. And then shall after these appear of men the 10th race, when the earth-shakening lightener shall break the zeal for idols. I think that's talking about Rome. And shall shake the people of 7-hilled Rome, and riches grated by Vulcan's fiery flame. And then shall bloody signs from heaven descend, end quote. Of course, Vulcan, mentioned here by Apollo's seer, is the god that Manly P. Hall said empowers the Freemasons' hands, which the seething energies of Lucifer inflame. And it was Malachi Martin who said the Freemasons would be the super force behind bringing Rome under the control of